Hey guys, so in this video I wanted to talk about something that is super prevalent in the entrepreneurship space and also in self-help in general, and that's affirmations. But more importantly, I wanted to show you guys how I've used them in the past to change who I am and also kind of like shift my reality a bit as well. And I also wanted to go over the common pitfalls along with what I believe is kind of like a better method of implementing affirmations as an agent of change. So let's get started, right? Like I wanted to share my experiences first just to give you a bit of context as to how I've actually developed my perspective on this. So I used it quite heavily when I first started my business back in 2020 because I was told it was helpful and I just used it without questioning, right? Because I saw people who were ahead of me kind of did it and I just didn't really care if it was like the right thing, right or wrong. I just wanted to try it, see if it worked. And mainly the reason why I started doing it was just because I really wanted to change my life and I really wanted to put my life on a different path than it was going down. And the outcome of that was I managed to hit pretty much most of my goals, along with being able to just like radically change my life as well as a result of it. Now, you might hear this and just think, oh my God, like affirmation sounds like the best thing ever. But obviously it doesn't, it's not just affirmations that change my life. It's also, well, predominantly the actions that I put in day to day for the past 2 years, right? So I don't want you to hear this statement and just think, oh, correlation means causation. So if Boyuan did affirmations and did this, then if I just do affirmations and ignore everything else, I can do the same, right? There's so many different factors that plays into one's success that it's very hard to distill it down to just like one tactic, which is what affirmations are. It's just a tactic, right? But I did learn some very useful things along the way as a result of implementing that fairly rigorously for about 2 months, 2 to 3 months, but I also used it quite loosely over the last 2 years in general in moments of struggle. So what I've learned is that affirmations, they just don't work, at least not in the way that you think, right? Because life and outcome is just simply cause and effect. So something happens leads to a different outcome. And the thing that I see most people do with affirmations is they focus on materialistic and outcome-driven things. So to give you an idea of what I mean by materialistic outcomes and affirmations, I mean, how often do you see on Instagram, for example, a motivational post saying, like this post if you want to be a billionaire in 5 years, or only millionaires like this post. Comment yes to affirm that you're gonna get like generationally wealthy, right? That would be something that's more outcome driven. Or when people visualize driving down, I don't know, like Beverly Hills in a Lamborghini and, you know, wearing a Rolex date and, you know, all this lavish things and really focus on the materialistic outcomes, it actually makes them a lot more unhappy. How I found affirmations to be better used is through action-centric affirmations. So that would be using affirmations to change yourself from a thought perspective, so like an internal dialogue perspective, which will help you to lead to produce better actions, in turn producing better results. So let's talk about a more practical way of implementing affirmations that I think could really help you. So first of all, you have to understand, outcomes are as a result of actions, and actions are as a result of your beliefs and your thoughts and what you think in your head, right? Because you generally wouldn't act in a way that goes against your beliefs and thoughts unless you're like, I don't know, heavily incentivized to or whatever, right? So the way it works is, you know, your thoughts lead to actions and your actions lead to results. And then from that result, you have some sort of processing unit in your head that processes those results, generating some feedback, which feeds into your thought, which feeds into your actions, which leads to other outcomes. And it's kind of like, it's pretty cyclical in that nature, right? Which is why a lot of people can spiral downwards or spiral upwards, right? So the way I like to use affirmations, at least nowadays, is more so to associate myself with more positive traits and characteristics that I would find kind of more desirable in the person that I want to become. So that would be things like, I like taking extreme ownership of my results and actions. I like identifying with someone that works extremely hard. And I like identifying with someone that doesn't make excuses for himself when he fails, right? So those are great things to identify with, and affirmations can really help you change your identity from a thought level and an internal dialogue level. Now, another key thing that plays into you changing your life, changing your identity and your actions is less to do with affirmations, but it's actually environment. And I'll get to how that's relevant in just a second, right? In my opinion, changing your environment is probably going to be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of changing, if you want to change who you are as an individual. Because surroundings and the people around you play a huge role into molding you into the person you've become. So if you're in an environment that is not conducive to growth, well, the best thing to do would just be to remove yourself from that environment and place yourself in a different environment that you feel is more conducive for your growth. However, not everyone would have the financial means to do that. So for example, if you're like a 15-year-old in an abusive family, then obviously you can't just like say, peace, I'm gonna like go to another country, move in by myself and live a fresh start, right? And in those situations, I've definitely not been in as bad of an environment as some people that I know. But in times when I felt like my environment wasn't 100% kind of like productive for my growth, I find it helpful to use affirmations as a way of changing my perception around the environment, to kind of like remove myself from the environment, at least mentally, so that it would reduce the impact, I guess, the environment would have on me. To give you an idea of what I mean by this, when I was in university, I found it quite hard to relate to a lot of people that was around me. And at times, you know, there were people that, especially when I first started, there was a couple people that I remember having pretty pessimistic outlook on my choices at the time, right? When I first initially dropped out of university. I didn't so much get like criticized for it, but it was more so being told that I was gonna fail, or like if I was just being a fucking idiot, things along those lines. And those are things where it's like someone external that's placing those thoughts into your head. And at the time, I couldn't afford to change my environment. So what I did was I just didn't let it affect me as much by mentally understanding, hey, this person's probably just, you know, saying that out of his own insecurity. And I really used affirmations as a way of affirming to myself that my choice was the right choice, even though at the time, you know, it was going against what everyone was telling me and what kind of like society was telling me, right? So I think affirmations could also be used to change your perception on your environment to kind of like mitigate its effects on your mental stability. Before I jump into a few of the potential side effects, because as you guys know, I like to talk about the downside as well as the upside, right? All the time. I wanted to give you a quick summary of what we've gone over so far, but more so distill it down to actionable takeaways that you can actually implement from this video. So there are predominantly 3 things that I like to do when it comes to affirmations. Number 1, that's using action or process-driven affirmations. I'll get to like what each of those are in a second. And also I like to use character-driven affirmations, so like character traits and characteristics, right? Fundamentally who you are. So let's go over what those are, and also I'll give you a framework that I like to use when it comes to creating my own affirmations and trying to change my own identity. So the framework that I like to use is super simple. When it comes to action or processed driven affirmations, I like to use the framework of saying I do, and then insert whatever action I want to do or aspire to implement more of in my life. And then I say because of desired outcome, and then I lead to say desired outcome. Because you have to understand, as people, we don't act because for the sake of acting most of the time, right? We act because there's a specific result that we want, and only acting in this way or doing this thing will get us there. So for example, if you want to lose weight, right? Like you need to go to the gym, you need to have a healthier diet, and you're gonna lose weight. But just saying, oh, I'm gonna go to the gym and eat healthier, unless those are things that you genuinely feel passionate about, that's not the thing that you want to do. It's get healthier and you know, lose weight, look good, right? But to get that outcome, you need to perform this action, which is why I like to have action or process-driven affirmations. So to give you an idea of what I mean by this is, I would tell myself something like, I like to go to the gym every day because it keeps me looking good and mentally fresh for business and leads to me having a healthier life and attracting hotter girls into my life. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm reframing that an action where normally people would focus on the pain and the downsides of it to focus on the upside, to make the hard thing easier. The other type of affirmations I like to use are character trait affirmations. So basically just changing who you are from a characteristics level. So imagine, I don't know, like playing Sims, right? I think when you're designing your Sim character, you can like increase the strength bar, you can increase the, you know, kindness bar, loving bar, things along those lines. It's basically how you can actually do that, but in real life. in my opinion. So the framework I use for characteristic traits would be I am insert character trait because insert experience that backs this character trait up. So essentially I'm gonna be amplifying the characteristics that I have exhibited in the past, right? So to give you an idea of what these affirmations might sound like is I am a person of integrity because I told, I'm not gonna say the name, despite me being heavily incentivized financially to say nothing. Or something like I take extreme ownership of my life because when I was broke in 2019, I didn't grow bitter at the people who exploited my labor. But instead, I used it as a learning moment because I understood that I had chosen to work for those people. So you see how in these two affirmations, I'm essentially saying, hey, this is a trait that I am and I identify with, and here's why I'm actually that. So essentially, rather than saying affirmations where you kind of just pull out of the thin air, you kind of affirm a character trait and then you back it up with evidence. Because in our heads, we like to form logical arguments as opposed to just pulling things out of thin air. Because for example, if you're like fat and you think you're really ugly, like you perceive yourself to be extremely ugly, it doesn't help to say to yourself and look yourself dead in the eye into the mirror and be like, oh, I am really handsome and I love how skinny I am, right? Like that's just not gonna work because visually everything you see goes against what you're saying to yourself. And what happens is there's like a mismatch of, you know, what your belief is and what your outcome is, right? So you just don't see this, and it leads you into this like negative feedback loop of, hey, I'm just like habitually lying to myself, and it makes your desired trait or desired outcome or desired action seem even further out of reach from you. Which is why I like to use logic-driven affirmations and argument-driven affirmation. So essentially, whenever I'm affirming something, I'm also backing it up with an argument or like a desired outcome, right? So those are what I call like, I guess, argument-driven affirmations. So I say one thing and then back it up with some evidence of my experiences in the past. Now let's talk about some of the potential downsides and the side effects that I've personally experienced when it comes to implementing affirmations heavily into my life and drastically changing who I am. This is something that I don't see people ever talk about, especially on YouTube, and I had no idea this was even a side effect until I really kind of like sat down and diagnosed myself, and I realized I was experiencing these things as a result of me kind of like changing my character, changing my actions and things along those lines. And the biggest one is kind of like rooting your identity so deep into what you affirm yourself to be, to the point where you become imbalanced. So to give you an idea of one of my flaws right now is that I take such extreme ownership of my own actions that I end up holding other people to the standard as well. So for example, whenever I get screwed over or whenever something bad happens to me, I just see, okay, well, it's because I acted in this way and I made this specific choice. To the point where when other people get screwed over, I'm just like, I have like a lack of empathy for people. I'm just like, well, it's because you chose this, right? To the point of almost like victim blaming, which is pretty bad. And this is something I'm trying to reverse. Another thing is, for example, when you have a lack of empathy for others, you actually have a lack of empathy for yourself. And this is something that I feel like a lot of people in the entrepreneurship space really struggle with. And that's, you know, you take such extreme ownership of your actions to the point where you just like don't even empathize with yourself anymore when you're feeling tired, when you're you know, like really not enjoying the work that you're doing, but because you have your identity rooted in being like a hard worker, you just become like this machine that always executes constantly and just, you know, like go, 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 that you end up forgetting to enjoy the process. And you become so focused on your visions and your goals and where you could be in 5 years' time, for example, that you get a ton of anxiety because you constantly feel like you're not meeting deadlines for yourself and you're, you know, not enough. And overall, you're just like lacking day-to-day, like being present in the moment. So these are some of the drawbacks that you can experience where you root your identity so heavily in who you want to become to the point where you become unbalanced. And that's where a lot of unhappiness can spawn. And that's why I feel like a lot of people who are hyper successful, they just, you know, they're too hard on themselves. End of the day, that's what I feel like it is. But then without being hard on themselves, or at least you perceive this to be true, right? If you're not so hard on yourself, you feel like you're gonna fail. And this is one of like the biggest side effects that I've experienced from changing my identity to someone who's like, yeah, like, you know, yeah, we're hardworking, but to someone who's like laser focused, outcome driven, and, you know, all of the positive traits that I still believe to be positive, but I just changed myself at such a pace where I became too imbalanced, you know? So this is one of the side effects. I'm not sure if that makes too much sense, especially if you're not in the space that I'm in, but I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like and subscribe, and I'm actually super curious to hear your thoughts and experiences with affirmations in the comments below, and I'm gonna read every single one. I might not reply to every single one, but I'm reading them all. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.